Nani Jansen Reventlow for an Edinburgh event, a morning talk followed by a discussion and coffee afterwards. And please join me in giving a warm welcome to me. So my name is Christina and I'm one of the booksellers at Lighthouse Bookshop. I am not a law scholar myself. I research publishing history. And actually there is a lot of things about like printing history and publishing history in the book. So basically, I'm coming to reflections on law and justice as a bookseller and as an organizer. So what's going to happen over the next hour is that Nani and I will have a chat for about 40-45 minutes, and then we'll open up to the floor for questions, both from people in the room and from people in the Zoom room. At 12, so in an hour, we will then have coffee and encourage more informal discussion for about half an hour. And the coffee is just
in that first room with the comfy chairs.
The room with the comfy chair. That's what the coffee is. So I'm going to be introducing our speaker just now. So this is Nani Jansen Reventlow, who is an international human rights lawyer. She is the founder of Systemic Justice, which advocates for marginalized communities through strategic litigation. Politico named her as one of society's great visionary tech leaders for her work on digital human rights. She has also been honoured with awards from Harvard, Oxford, and Columbia universities. Nani, I wondered if I could start by asking you, we're here at Edinburgh Law School, and there might be law scholars and law students in the room. I wondered if you could describe for us the path that you took from attending law school yourself to running Systemic Justice and being here today with your book.
Thank you everyone for coming, and thanks so much for having me. My path from law school to where we're sitting now and running Systemic Justice wasn't one that was very meticulously planned. I actually decided to study law after having briefly studied to be a dentist before that. And, I ran away in the second year. I was putting on my white coat and I was going to do some teeth cleaning, and I was just like, no, it's actually really not for me. And then like the second aha moment was like, I could just quit. And yeah, so I didn't know what to do for a little while. Worked and then still couldn't make up my mind like what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I ended up studying law because it would give me options. So when I started law school, I just wanted to study something I enjoyed. I loved it. I was terrible now. Annoying person who always wanted to debate everything. When I finished law school, I did another master's because I thought I wasn't done learning yet. So I went to Columbia Law School in Netherlands, there focused on international human rights topics. I started applying for jobs, and no one wanted to have me. I wanted to work in human rights. I was like, I'm right, I'm excited, like, hire me. And they were like, yeah, no, you don't have experience, so like, you're not going to put you on payroll. And a friend advised me then to say, like, okay, you should actually train to be a proper lawyer first. So I reluctantly foundational for me to really kind of properly learn lawyering skills. But the moment that I made it through my training and my admission to the bar was permanent, I started applying for jobs. And ended up working for an NGO that works to defend journalists and bloggers. That was in London. It's now called Media Defense. And freedom of expression wasn't an issue that I actually did anything with when I was in law school. But the job sounded so nice because it was litigation in all different places around the world. It's where I learned about strategic litigation and actually started litigating strategically myself as well. So it was a really wonderful place to kind of put together the theory of human rights work and the skills I built at the law firm together. It's something that I really enjoyed. I also figured that there were more rights out there than just free speech and free media. So after nearly 5 years, I was like, okay, I should go. And I went to the US. I spent a year at Harvard, Cambridge, Massachusetts, on a project that actually looked at strategic litigation and how can you make sure that lawyers, activists, academics, technical experts can all work together better in strategic cases to make sure they have more impact. And when I came to the end of that, I had the opportunity to found my first organization, the Digital Freedom Fund, which works on strategic litigation of digital rights in Europe, so human rights in a digital context. And that work basically started bringing to light the issues that we're trying to change with the work that we're doing with systemic justice. At DFF, we were supporting others who were doing strategic litigation, so we fundraised to make sure that we could support their strategic cases, and we also convened people so they could strategize. And you got sort of like a nice overview of what was happening like in the field. And I started noticing patterns like in the dynamics between the litigating organizations and the communities they were saying that they were serving, which in best case scenario was a very traditional lawyer-client relationship. Worst case scenario was actually extractive. And some of the work we also started doing while I was there was initiating a decolonizing process for the digital rights field, which brought us in touch with a lot of organizations working on racial, social, and economic justice in the region. And all of those things kind of together led to this moment where it's like, well, it should be possible to do this in a different way and really make sure that the communities themselves are actually in charge when it comes to using the courts in their campaigns. So that's what led to setting up systemic justice. I was a bit reluctant at the time because I wasn't super keen on building anything from scratch again. So started talking to a lot of people first to really make sure that it was something that people actually thought would add value. I'll stop talking there.
Thank you so much for taking us through that. I think that's great, and that's also touching on so many subjects that we're going to explore in the next half hour. So I'm in my questions, I'm going to move through your book in order of the chapters so attendees can see how your argument builds. But I also really love that in the introduction you really encourage readers to move through the book at their own pace in whatever order appeals. I'll read some quotations from the book along the way to prompt our reflections. So the book is called Radical Justice, and the first chapter really focuses on the radical part of that title. And he writes, instead of continuing to meet the keepers of the status quo on their turf, engaging with their conversations, we need to start our own. Share the vision of what a world underpinned by equity, social, racial, and economic justice looks like, what that means for everyone in practice. I wonder if you could share with us some of the examples that you found most illustrative of how radical change can be brought about. So the book is great because it has all these examples from the world of how people are already applying the concepts that we share. So I wondered if you could talk to us about radical change and I guess what makes that different from other kinds of change.
Thank you. And maybe also just to clarify that the radical in the book's title comes from Angela Davis's famous quote, radical simply means grasping things by the root. So the idea that we really need to understand the root causes of the injustice that we're seeing in the world today in order to be able to properly address them, rather than settling for cosmetic changes that are only superficial. And the first chapter in Ode to Being Radical tries to kind of like really make the point that it's good to kind of like have a bold and ambitious vision for change. We're not going to see all the change we want to bring about in our own lifetimes, but we can actually have that as a compass and not settle for whatever is engaging with the injustice that we're resisting. So one of the examples that I give in the book of things that seemed impossible at the time, but did happen, is the possible threats of nature. So the Maori community, in New Zealand, had been fighting for a really long time to actually give the river, Nani River, legal personality. And they kind of like positioned themselves as custodians of the land that it ran through, but they wanted the river to be recognized as an entity that actually had rights, which seemed a completely outlandish concept at the time when they started making that argument. But they took it to court, and they actually managed to get that acknowledgement from the court. And it went in tandem with, and also kind of further sparked and ignited a really broad movement around the world where communities in many, many different places have been claiming rights of nature, of the land that they live on, of the bodies of water that they live with. And it's still a work in progress, but it is an example of something that, why would you give, personality to something that doesn't look like us, right? But now it's here.
Thank you. Your book emphasizes throughout collective action, and I think we also heard that in your introduction to your kind of path through from law school to where you are now. The theme of collective action is also vital to the second chapter, which talks about hero worship and activism. So you write, the book is so great and you can quote every bit of the book, and I quite a long quote, so I'm going to write it slightly. Beyond harmful gender and racist dynamics, the cult of hero worship and activism has a debilitating effect on each one of us as individuals. Placing so much emphasis on the exceptional powers of the leader, their leadership, vision, ability to mobilize, enforces this passivity and powerlessness. Rather than appreciating their own agency and ownership, it creates a dynamic where people feel they can only take action when this is prompted by the leader, or believe that what they want to do could never be as big or impactful as what the leading figure could achieve, so they might as well not even try. I wonder if you could speak about the significance of placing this idea so early in the book.
Thank you. So what I'm trying to do with the book is, besides kind of making really clear what the root causes of injustice are, how those different things are interconnected with each other, I also want to make sure that we don't feel like overwhelmed and powerless because of that. So one of the things I try to do at the end of each chapter is give further openings to further learning about the topic that we've been looking at, reflection questions to kind of like sit with, but also concrete points of action, entry points to kind of like move into action. I keep on making the point, I think, throughout the book that each of us has our own sphere of influence, right? Like we have different ecosystems that we operate in, different spaces, we have different levels of power in each of them, and it's up to us to identify in all of those spaces what the changes that we can make. And I think that our culture generally and the narratives that we're confronted with on a regular basis keep on feeding us this idea that we need to follow someone, that there's someone who's kind of like more inspirational than we are, who has a bigger vision than we do, and that's not how we're going to bring about change, right? It's about each of us actually figuring out what our role is in the revolution and actually taking that ownership. So really examining everywhere, every time, like what can I actually do? And I think that that's a central point, and hence it's early on in the book.
Thank you. Chapter 3 structured to uphold white supremacy and indiscriminately exclude undesirable black people, people of colour, and other marginalised groups. And she also writes that lawyers should be at the front lines of changing how the legal system works for everyone. I'd like to invite you to speak more on this point and on how lawyers and non-lawyers can reverse the narrative of the perfect plaintiff. I'm making a little assumption that because we're in the law school, we'll have at least one future lawyer in the room or current lawyer. But yeah, I'd love you to speak a little bit more about reversing that narrative of the perfect plaintiff.
Thank you. And so I think I illustrate in that chapter like how the legal system is very much geared towards upholding the rights of only very specific types of people, people who are beyond reproach, who are model citizens, and that is a much higher bar to meet already when you don't hold privilege that a lot of white people have in our society. And how the system also conversely works very strongly against marginalized communities. I cite loads of statistics, I won't bore you with that even if I could repeat all of that on the top of my head. But the image is very stark, right? And it's also something that we're seeing very much in the work that we're doing with communities at Systemic Justice, that there's actually quite a lot of unlearning that needs to happen in that process, because people are so used to the system being used against them that the idea that it could be a tool of change that they can actually wield is quite like a concept to really get used to. What I think is very difficult is that we as lawyers, I always like to say that we also have a role in the whole legal process and in educating the system that we're operating inside. You can make a choice. You can either go with the status quo and follow everything that we currently have. It's very seductive to do that, right? Because you are like, we want to have the best outcome for our client. We don't want to rock any boats. Like, we should make sure that we kind of like play into all of those expectations that we have. So a judge would expect to hear from me like how wonderful this person is and how much of a central pillar of their community they are, and etc. etc. But it helps reinforce this idea that we kind of can only acknowledge that perfect people, which none of us are, have rights. And it also erases the leniency factor that is quite often given to white people who come in touch with the justice system, who commit a crime, and there's often kind of this narrative of, oh, but like we don't want to ruin the rest of this person's life, they should have a chance, etc. And that leniency is hardly ever applied when it concerns someone from a marginalized background. So there's something in there about having to break that open. It's not just the lawyer's role, right? It also has to do with like how we train judges and what further learning they are being invited to do. It also has to do with the way that cases are being talked about in the media, right? Like if you just look at reporting on court cases, like what kind of adjectives do you see depending on who's in the dock, right? Like there's a lot in there. But we as lawyers also have a role to play, and we can actually be more proactive in figuring out where that balance lies, like where can we go without obviously jeopardizing the well-being of our clients, but at the same time kind of like challenging the systems in which we operate.
Thank you. That brings us very neatly to my next question, which is about that community-driven litigation. So the next chapter in the book is entitled "On Using the Mass as Tools: Litigation for Systemic Change," which quotes Roger Lord. So you write that if we are to use the mass as tools to chip away at the master's house, communities most affected by injustice should be in the lead. Community-driven litigation is a model that allows communities and movements to remain rooted in their power while wielding legal instruments on their own terms. This means moving away from what I called a law-first approach, which prioritizes the law and the unjust system it upholds, and moves towards radically transforming how the law can be put to service of justice. And earlier in that chapter, you talk about the tension that exists between what is law and what is just.
So, let's see where to start with this, because it goes back again a little bit to like working within the system, right? And maybe I want to explain a little bit why we're even bothering to do that. And because one of the things I want to make really clear is that that's not a goal in and of itself, right? To kind of keep the system in place by tweaking it. Audre Lorde's essay on master's tools actually has prompted a lot of very deep reflection with me when I was working as a human rights lawyer and trying to kind of like figure out like, so, but does that mean actually that perhaps because I'm working in a system that's faulty, right? It reproduces, it represents power structures. Should I just kind of like, if I want to bring about bigger change, should I just like let go of all of that? Actually, like, can I even be a lawyer? So it's a very profound examination. I ended up with a position where there's two kind of like tracks in my mind. One is the world-making exercise that we need to do, the envisioning and dreaming up and then building of alternative systems to the ones that we have. But because that's a longer-term project, we also still need to make sure that the systems that we do have in the meantime, at the very least, cause much less harm than they currently are, without mistaking that goal for the end goal, because it's not, right? Like, so it's not about fixing the system so that we can keep it, it's about making the system work better while we're actually building the alternative. Part of that is making sure that marginalized communities are actually able to use those systems to their benefit, to pursue their campaign goals. And a lot of, oh, did I do something? Here I am again. Sorry. And a lot of that actually has to do with giving them a very different position, different role in the entire process, which for lawyers means decentralizing of yourself as the leader, the visionary, the designer, the hero of the story. Actually, we're all very used, right, to these newspaper articles. We see lawyers on the court steps and so on. There's a big tendency of centering kind of like those actors in legal processes, and we're kind of like indoctrinated that way from very early on. Like you learn a very specific skill set in law school. You are then trained with being that you're the one who can interpret how the rules work. You're the one who can tell how successful a certain strategy is going to be. You're going to advise people on that. And what we're trying to do really is kind of like take a really big step back, or several steps back, and actually saying like, you know, the people who are most affected by injustice are the ones who actually know what it should look like for them, what they're able to do, what they need to kind of like go through these processes, and also what reparations look like for them in that context. Because we have a very unimaginative way, also kind of, okay, we'll ask for some reparations, we'll ask for some non-repetition guarantees, etc. And that's about it. Whereas there are many different measures that you could ask for or pursue that facilitate community healing, that facilitate commemoration, and kind of like acknowledge harm that has been caused in a different way than just the monetary kind of aspect of things. So the way we're trying to operationalize that is by building a fundamentally different methodology. So instead of saying like, okay, I see that you have these problems, this is the case I can take to court for you, tell me what you want, and I'll go over and write a brief, and I'll come back and have a chat by you. We actually start with this vision, like, you know, what would it look like for your community if things were working the way that you want them to work? What are the things that you're currently doing to get there? And then you start examining, like, what are the different legal strategies that could help get you there sooner, get you there better, and also what are the things that we need to do to safeguard you in the process, which you need to work in a trauma-informed way, right? Because you don't need to be additionally traumatized by going through a legal procedure. What is the resourcing that you need, other kinds of support, etc. So taking a much more holistic view of that journey and really looking at it as a long-term partnership rather than as one-off cases. The idea is that we are the legal partner along the way in that journey towards that end many different kinds. You can be collaborating with all sorts of other lawyers, etc. But it's about kind of like acknowledging that systemic change takes longer, and that requires a longer-term partnership that's really rooted in trust also.
Thank you so much. The next question I want to ask is on the next chapter, which is on climate justice, and I think it also reflects on the point that you just made, which is working with the communities that are affected now. You talk in the book about often the way we speak about, or media thinks about climate justice is this is for our children's future, but actually in the book you talk about there are people who are affected right now, who were affected 10 years ago, so actually working with those communities. So what you write in the book is that these communities should drive law and policy making as knowledge holders and leaders instead of continuing a framing in which they are simply the beneficiaries of climate projects. It means prioritizing the current needs of local communities most affected by the lasting legacies of racial capitalism and colonialism in national and international conversations on climate justice. I know we'll speak more about reparations later, which you also touched on, or I guess the word came up in the previous response that you gave. But I wondered if you could highlight for us the many ways that the recentering of the climate crisis as colonial injustice, how does that affect how we grapple with the crisis?
That's a really big question. I think so. I rely a lot on Olúfẹ Táíwò's beautiful book, Reconsidering Reparations, on this point. He beautifully sets out like how the current landscape that we're operating in, our international, global order, is still running on the tracks that were laid when we were engaging in global slave trade, and that determined where benefits were flowing and where the negative impact of that global slave trade was flowing. And he makes a beautiful case that, the case for reparations, the case for climate justice is the same as a racial justice project in this day and age, because it all kind of like stems from the same origins. So when you then kind of like have conversations about the global north having to pay climate reparations to what is referred to as the global south, but technically those are that's framed as loans. You look at that through a very different lens, right? Because it's just replication of the same kind of dynamic where there's actually no giving back of any kind. It's just creating different systems of dependency. And what we're seeing right now, right, is that the climate crisis is fully here, right? It's just not as visible for us just yet. And that keeps the conversation lacking the actual urgency that it requires right now, just because our homes here aren't flooding yet. Our school is still standing. Our crops are still growing. We're just not treating the issue with the urgency that it really merits. And this is kind of like replicated at a smaller scale, right? When you were just referencing the point I made about this kind of like future of our children narrative, which you see in a lot of issues, by the way. You also see it when it comes to digital rights, like it's all going to be really bad in the future, it's like it's bad right now. But not just for everyone, and that's the thing, right? Like, so when you look at generally how the field of climate activists, and I say climate activists, not climate justice activists here on purpose, is made up of mostly middle class white folks. Yeah, as much as the children of people with marginalized identity who are literally dying from the effects of air pollution. So it's already here, and that luxury of talking about the future isn't there. But again, it's about like who can feel already what is already happening. And the reason why it's so important to make sure that the people who are currently being harmed are placed at the center of these conversations right now is A, they need to be able to fight back with all possible power and resources that are possible, but also because this is the moment in which we can actually still do something to avoid reaching that point of no return that we're heading towards at gigantic speed right now.
Thank you. I'm going to open to questions in about 5-7 minutes. So I'm just letting the room know so you can think about what question you might want to ask. You can see that I have many more. I'm just going to decide what to ask. You spoke, I'm sleeping currently my question on chapter 6, so I'll have to read the book to because you mentioned digital rights, in chapter 7 on digital rights, you address AI, or so-called AI, facial recognition technology, the technology people use to track their mental and physical health, including fertility, and how these technologies are frequently rooted in data that reinscribes white supremacy, but also are like used for surveillance and other harmful aims. So the chapter ends with a lot of examples of community initiatives that use technology to support environmental and social justice movements. You write, real lasting change, creating a society and corresponding digital space that is not rooted in exploitation and extraction, doesn't require magic and fireworks. It requires centering our humanity and finding comfort in sharing ownership and control with people who are different from us and making our equal right to be there a reality. As an expert in decolonizing the digital rights space, I wonder if we could ask you to reflect on a radical action our audience members can take. I should also say many radical actions are in the book, as Nani has already said, so each chapter ends on a section that has reading recommendations and reflection prompts and next steps. But for the digital rights space, I just wondered if we could ask you for a reflection on that.
You're asking for a radical action that people can take. So I'm trying to think of something that's like both like low threshold enough and at the same time meaningful. But there are some really wonderful toolkits out there, and you have to kind of like find one that speaks to you, to kind of do a little digital, like a little audit actually of the tech that you use. And hardly anyone ever reads, the terms and conditions that they sign up for. So that's really great. I'll click yes. But there are a lot of choices that we perhaps aren't aware that we're making in that process. And just kind of building in, even if you just take an hour, right? Just to kind of like find a nice toolkit, to find a nice checklist somewhere that feels right to you. To look at the different things that you're using and how you're using them. If you want to take it to a next level, what is a kind of a time frame that you can agree on with yourself where you actually don't have your phone on you, you're not engaging with the screen? That sounds very small, but like one of the things that you can, if you have an iPhone, one of the things that you can do is actually kind of like track, right, like how much you use your phone every week, and just giving yourself a little bit of a reality check, because you always underestimate it, at least I do anyway. And like, what? I can't have been on my phone this much this week, and it tells you also like which apps you're using a lot. It just gives you a lot of insight on how you are engaging with tech, and just giving yourself that transparency and the insight in your own user data gives you the possibility to start making different choices.
structure that we need to fundamentally alter the flow of benefits and disadvantages in our societies is what will make a reparations effort holistic. It is also what will give it the potential for this process to be more than an effort of restoration or repair. If we want to be truly ambitious, we should get to a place where we create something that is regenerative. Before we open to questions, I'd really like to take the time to ask you to reflect more on how reparations touched on the other subjects of this book. As you will have, I think, noticed in the discussion, the book is so well structured because it builds an argument, but also everything sort of links back with each other, so you're left with a real, like, holistic understanding of radical justice. If you can reflect on how reparations kind of links to everything else, that would be great.
I have 2 minutes now. So there's we just were talking about the link between reparations and climate justice. There's a really easy link to make also, like, with digital rights. One of the ways in which extraction is currently taking place is through data, right? We also have to think about where all the kind of base materials for our devices come from. It's feeding genocide in Congo, for example. So there's a lot of ways in which like the fallout of colonialism is very visible in some of these kind of really bigger dynamics that we're seeing right now. But one of the things that actually kind of like led to the conversation that then led to writing this book is that we're seeing the fallout of colonialism and the reluctance to kind of like properly grapple with reparations everywhere in our day-to-day life. So the examples that we were talking about like the way that the justice system treats each of us differently, the way that our healthcare system works differently for people with marginalized identity, education, housing, basically all the topics throughout the book that we look at find their roots in that dynamic, and the fact that we just haven't yet done this bigger project of rebuilding a system. And there are entry points, obviously, to kind of like engage with all of that at the moment, but the fundamental bigger piece of work is what is sort of lagging behind right now.
Thank you. I will now open to the floor with this exciting
Yeah,
if anyone in the room has a question, or anyone on the live stream, please raise your hand. Yeah, there's a question.
One sec, I'm just gonna check.
Is this, yeah, oh, it is live. Okay, where were you?
Hi, I'm going to be honest, I haven't read your book yet, but I am looking forward to reading it. And coming from, I'm Pakistani, so I have heard of the devastating effects that climate change is happening in Pakistan, and the floods that are happening, and the heat that is rising. And my question is more in terms of reparations, because before colonization, that region knew how to deal with the weather and the environment. It built architecture around it to be able to maintain it and provide a very good life for its citizens. After colonization, it seemed like a lot of that knowledge got lost, purposely so. And on top of that, a lot of the resources, as you've mentioned, have been extracted as well. How can you do reparations in those circumstances? How do you get knowledge back? How do you rebuild what was lost?
So thank you for flagging that. So when we talk about reparations, we quite often think about the bit that nobody ever wants to talk about, which is the money. But reparations are much more holistic, right? And I refer, for example, to the CARICOM 10-point action plan on reparations, which explicitly includes knowledge transfer. And there are a lot of other measures in there that kind of would help address this in a much more holistic way. So indeed, like, what is needed in this specific circumstance and in other circumstances beyond writing the check and, you know, the commemoration and so on. No one seems to research is also very popular, but all of those other bits that are needed to actually practically change things is what we definitely need to talk about a lot more. Thank you for bringing that in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm from Colombia. I'm currently studying data inequality and society and trying to kind of leverage my skill set, similar to kind of pulling it, like learn the skill set, trying to apply it in a different way. And I'm very excited to read your book as well. My question is around this like tension that you spoke to about like, can you just bundle the master's house with master's tools, and at the same time, can the world build on the side and hold that tension? And so when I'm thinking about the data space and data privacy and data ownership, it's something that's already being stolen, it's already being extracted, and I'm still kind of finding my way around like what's out there at the moment. And so there's like this one argument that I recently heard of like being able to leverage the legal and financial structures of copyright to, you know, assert ownership over your data or things like that. That said, I'm also kind of trying to get involved in these like collective data governance kind of alternative building, and I'm curious to know from your perspective, like what, and I'm sure, I'm excited to read your book because I imagine there's some in there, but like what are some things that like the global public could become aware of like what are the ways in which we can legally, infrastructurally kind of defend our rights at the moment, what's available? And also, are there any things on the horizon that you're seeing of these like kind of world building alternatives that are kind of coming to mind from where you're standing?
Good. It's a beautiful big question. Concerning like entry points that we have right now, right? There's lots of them. Like copyright is an interesting one. We have our different frameworks, right? And we're big fans of kind of setting up big rights frameworks for all of us to well, it puts a lot of burden on the individual, obviously, to enforce, but like at least it sets up the scaffolding that is needed for it. I'm a big fan of the boring but important issue of procurement, because I think that some of the bigger risks actually come from government and government entities using off-the-shelf software that is made by companies and kind of like hiding behind that shield that they then say like, oh, but it's our IP, we don't have to tell you how it works exactly, because then we will be giving a heads up to our competitors, so we can't. We would not let anyone build as much as a parking garage without a proper procurement process. But it's okay to just kind of like buy software, to kind of actually be involved in sometimes really sensitive processes that have big impact on individuals' lives. And there needs to be a lot more transparency around that. There needs to be much more structural moving away from this industry narrative that it's not necessary to share what's under the hood. There's many different ways in which it can be provided without actually creating competition vulnerabilities. Yeah, so I actually think that procurement, boring but important, could be a really important entry point. And also it would help create generally like more transparency about what is being used, and government there should also, for example, be a lot more proactive in actually saying like, okay, well, there is X software or X decision-making program or X algorithm involved in these processes that we are trying to, often the word is optimize or make more efficient, etc. Did I answer your question?
I think so, yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Just speaking to that? Okay. Thanks very much for the talk. You mentioned earlier on about how different communities are portrayed in the media. And in this country and other countries, both the print media and the online media is very right-wing. And therefore it's not a level playing field for different communities. So the messaging that's given day in, day out is that a particular community is bad. The impact on the young people who then grow up thinking, actually I come from a community which is not good because that's how it's portrayed, and also the majority community who then have a different view of the how can we level the playing field, or how we can we get radical justice if we're fighting an uphill battle to get heard?
That's a great question, and that is a problem that we're seeing like all over. So I'm not entirely sure how we're going to change like what is happening within the media landscape in of itself, like how we're going to break through, a BBC and whatnot. What I do know is that there are great alternatives out there that just quite often lack the resources to kind of expand their scope and be more visible to more people out there. So one of the things that I do think is the same way. I think it's one of the things that I recommend in the book, actually, just the same way as doing a little audit of how you engage with technology, is where do you get your news? Like, what are different ways in which I can actually get my information moving away from the mainstream narratives? I don't want to sound like a Luddite, but like, I at some point actually just kind of like stopped watching, when I still lived in the Netherlands, I just stopped watching the morning news at some point, because I got so annoyed with the coloring that was ingrained in every single item that was kind of positioning certain groups in certain ways, that was positioning certain kind of like geopolitical dynamics in a certain way. And I was just like, I just don't want you to tell me anymore like what I should be thinking. And I just started figuring out, okay, what are newsletters that I can subscribe to, where I can get different kinds of views, what are things in print that I can get access to that give me different options, and also just to kind of make up my own mind. It's a small thing, but at the same time I also think if we all do that, and if we all kind of decide to support like one of our media or something like that, which you have here in the UK, then we can actually start shifting, because in the end, unfortunately, in our capitalist society still, your purchase power as an individual is going to be something that can actually help shift the dial. So, some thoughts.
Do we have, I'll go here and then I'll pass it backwards.
Hi, Nani. Okay. So you and I are both human rights lawyers and teachers to some extent at university. And the process of becoming a lawyer and then practicing law is about intentionally using formal and exclusionary language to express ideas in a way that's unintelligible to everyone else. I've only been able to flip through the book, but I can see that you took a choice there to write sort of clearly and accessibly, and also to give people options other than your own knowledge to follow through at the end of each chapter. And I guess my question is, you had a huge choice of things to do at this stage. So why did you choose this format, this approach, and most of all, maybe, what do you hope, like in your best moments when you're writing, like what did you hope people would do with the book? Like, who do you want to read it? Like, what do you want to see happen next?
That's a wonderful question. Why did I choose this format? I actually structure my thoughts by writing. And I was really happy that I had the opportunity to have a bit more space to develop my thinking on a number of topics I've been working on for a really long time than, like an op-ed here or a blog post or an article. So it was really nice to kind of actually feel that I could take up that space. I still wanted to keep it like short enough, so that it remained accessible. But that was one of the reasons why. It was very, very selfishly. I just enjoy writing a lot. And what I would hope is that, well, there's a couple of things, and I think I also write that in the introduction of the book, is that one, I hope that it gives some people some recognition on some of the things that they have been thinking about. Maybe I'm also quite honest about some of the challenges that I've encountered in doing this work, and yeah, that might actually kind of bring a bit of support to other people out there who I do not yet know. I also hope that it sparks some deeper reflection. Not everyone who will pick up the book will be like, yeah, like tear everything down and build a new world. But hopefully it will be uncomfortable enough and not too uncomfortable for them to at least kind of like start thinking about some of these topics, or at least considering them from a different angle. And I also hope that it will bring some inspiration for those of us who are engaged in activism, because I try to kind of give a lot of examples of how people across the world are approaching different issues. And some of the nicest feedback I've received on the Dutch edition, which was came out in 2024, was that people kind of like were like, oh, I already have like so many new ideas of things I want to try, and that is really really wonderful to hear. So I'm hoping that will continue.
There was a question just over there. Go for it.
Thank you so much. This is fantastic. I have just kind of like a little follow-up in terms of like, first of all, like I love how I can see your approach with your business and how you kind of like taking it into the writing of the book, like kind of the experiences you have in running a sustainable organization and how kind of like that reflects into the book, and not just kind of like quick solutions, but actually what is that long-term vision. That's brilliant. And I guess my question there is sort of like, what do you think we can do to sort of like, in general, shift that attention from that kind of like quick solution that give that instant gratification, and we all know like what we're talking about here, to that kind of like work on the systemic injustices that are going on, especially when we're talking about the uncomfortable with money. It's so I've heard that in the US, like 88% of philanthropic money goes to 5% of charities. People just Google the quick things. So how do you find that balance in terms of like, yes, get the quick result, but also kind of like work on the systemic?
Thank you for that. I think there's probably two components to that. I think one thing that has helped me a lot is kind of like really looking at the work that I'm doing and that Rami are doing now as part of a continuum, right? We're continuing the work of people who come before us. When we can no longer do our bit, like other people will take over. There's one particular phrase that was kind of like that really has stuck in my mind since I heard that. Was when I was working on a program called Symposium on Strength and Solidarity for Human Rights, which brought together human rights leaders from across the world to kind of like allow them to connect with each other, talk about shared challenges, and also foster solidarity between very different areas of human rights work. And at one of the first gatherings, we went to a farm and we planted trees. And one of the people was working on the farm said, well, few farmers sit in the shade of the tree they plant. And that just kind of like just stuck with me as like a lot of the things that we do now will benefit people we don't know yet, and we may never know. And similarly, you know, we are now continuing work that has been done by many generations before us. So there's something there about like reconciling yourself with the fact that whatever you're doing now, even though you may not see the concrete end result or the full end result of it, it's enough. And you do that in the most sustainable way that you can make happen, and that is good. There's something about like being okay with that. The other thing is to really be quite tuned into the changes that you are seeing, right? Because things shift slowly, but you can quite often see movement. And just because you haven't made it to that end post, that end goal, that end vision yet, doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't meaningful. And sometimes that's just holding the line. Because I also think that we are expected to do such big work on a shoestring budget. I remember when I was running the Digital Freedom Fund and, you know, fundraising, I feel like this tiny grant, you know, and I was just like, what, you're expecting us to kind of enable people to take, to to take on tech giants with just a couple of breadcrumbs, essentially. So we're being asked to do like quite impossible things. And if nevertheless we're able to at least hold the line, that in and of itself is a remarkable achievement. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that and also kind of like applaud ourselves for that on a regular basis, because that is meaningful.
One last one here.
Hello. I wanted to, along the lines of what you were just talking about, I'd be curious how you decide on what to focus, how you spend your time. There's so much to think about and to worry about. There's so many things that are needed. How do you decide how you focus your time, either personally or within systemic justice?
Great question, thank you. So within systemic justice, we basically asked our community partners because exactly this, there's so many issues to work on. They're all urgent. So we went through a very extensive community consultation process to ask marginalized groups all over Europe what was high on their list, what were the things that they were firefighting right now, and then also did a check like who is already working on certain issues. And from that, we ended up working on climate justice and on social protection. Social protection means housing, healthcare, education, all the areas where government should be providing access to essential services, but is doing less and less so, and especially when it comes to specific groups. Because both of those issues were very high on the agenda, and at the same time were underserved by strategic litigation that takes an explicit intersectional approach. We're seeing lots of climate litigation, not a lot of climate justice litigation, for example. So this is how we set the course for the work that we're doing with systemic justice. For me personally, I try to find a balance where I can add value, actually, and I'm not just another person who thinks they have something to offer because I enjoy doing it, but also in something that I enjoy doing. And I say that on purpose because I sometimes, and I also say that in the book actually, it's great to find something that you enjoy doing because this way you'll keep it up, right? Quite often kind of get a little bit of a view of like activism as like a bit of a martyr activity, like it has to be hard, it has to be painful, otherwise it doesn't count. I mean, it's painful enough just to kind of exist in this world from time to time. We don't have to add to that ourselves by doing things that we actually don't enjoy doing. So if you can find that sweet spot as much as possible, I think yeah, that's the way to go. And I try. I'm not saying that I'm super good at it necessarily, but that's what I try to do.
Thank you so much, Nani. Thank you so much for all your questions. The book is such an energizing read and such a great guide for dismantling the systems of oppression in our world. There's so much in it, so much we didn't even have a chance to even touch on in our conversation today. I really urge everyone to read it. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. Thank you for sticking around for a signing, and we'll also have coffee after this, so please, if you can, do stay for that. Myri will show you where the coffee is that right?
Yes, when we're done in here, basically, I will go down the corridor and you'll pass me on the way towards the exit. And yeah, we have tea and coffee, and that's where we'll have books and a little table for signing. So we'll be in that room if you follow around.
Great, amazing. Before we do that,